Harold Martinez had always been an early riser. At 72 years old, his body clock still operated on military time, waking him at 500 hours every morning without fail. This particular Tuesday in downtown Phoenix started no differently than any other. He made his black coffee, checked the weather forecast, and prepared for his daily walk to the corner market. The desert sun was just beginning to paint the sky in soft oranges and pinks when Harold stepped onto the cracked sidewalk outside his modest duplex. His neighborhood wasn't the safest anymore, but it was home. He'd bought the place with his Army pension 15 years ago, after his wife Martha passed away. The area had seen better days, with empty lots scattered between rundown buildings and the occasional homeless encampment tucked behind chain-link fences. Harold walked with purpose, his weathered hands stuffed deep in his jacket pockets. His gray hair was neatly combed and his posture remained straight despite his age. Old habits died hard, and military bearing was one of them. He nodded politely to Mrs. Rodriguez, sweeping her front steps, and waved to young Tommy heading off to school with his backpack bouncing against his small frame. 3 blocks from home, Harold heard the commotion before he saw it. Angry voices echoed from the alley between Sanchez Auto Repair and an abandoned restaurant that had been closed for months. His instincts, honed by 30 years in the Army, told him to keep walking. Mind your own business, the rational part of his brain whispered, but something else pulled him toward the sound. As he approached the mouth of the alley, Harold could make out 3 figures. 2 men were standing over a third person who was down on the ground. The victim appeared to be wearing some kind of uniform, though Harold couldn't make out the details from his position. What he could see clearly was the blood pooling beneath the fallen man. "Where is it?" one of the attackers demanded, his voice sharp and demanding. He was a tall, thin man with greasy hair and multiple tattoos covering his arms. "We know you have it. Just tell us where it is and this stops." The man on the ground tried to speak, but only a weak cough emerged. Harold could see he was young, maybe mid-20s, with short-cropped hair and the kind of physical build that suggested military training. Blood was seeping through his shirt and his breathing was labored. "Check his pockets again," the second attacker ordered. This one was shorter but broader, with dead eyes that Harold had seen too many times before. The kind of eyes that belonged to someone who had crossed lines that normal people never approached. Harold knew he should call the police, but these men would be gone long before help arrived. The young man on the ground was losing blood fast, and every second mattered. Harold had faced impossible odds before, in places far more dangerous than a Phoenix alley. He'd made a promise to himself long ago that he would never stand by and watch someone die if he could help it. Taking a deep breath, Harold stepped into the alley. "Hey!" he called out in his strongest command voice, the same tone that had once directed soldiers in combat zones. "Step away from him now." Both attackers turned toward Harold with expressions of disbelief and irritation. The tall one laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the brick walls. "Old man, you need to turn around and walk away." "This doesn't concern you." "Like hell it doesn't," Harold replied, moving closer. He could see the young man's injuries more clearly now. Multiple stab wounds to the torso, defensive cuts on his hands where he'd tried to protect himself. But he was still conscious, still fighting to stay alive. The shorter attacker pulled out a knife, its blade still stained with blood. "You want to be a hero, Grandpa? At your age? You should be home watching television and taking your pills." Harold had faced men with knives before. He'd also faced men with guns, bombs, and intentions far worse than simple robbery. These 2 punks had no idea who they were dealing with. "Son, I've forgotten more about fighting than you'll ever know. Last chance to walk away." The tall one reached into his jacket, and Harold saw the glint of metal. Another weapon, probably a gun this time. The situation was escalating quickly, but Harold had committed himself. There was no backing down now. "Marcus is right," the shorter one said to his partner. "Old fool wants to play soldier." He lunged forward with the knife, aiming for Harold's midsection. But Harold Martinez hadn't survived 3 tours of duty and countless dangerous missions by being slow or unprepared. He sidestepped the attack and grabbed the man's wrist, using his momentum against him. Years of hand-to-hand combat training kicked in as if no time had passed at all. The fight was brutal and quick. Harold managed to disarm the first attacker and send him sprawling, but the tall one came at him from behind. Harold felt the first stab wound pierce his shoulder blade, sending fire through his entire upper body. He spun around and caught his attacker's arm, but not before the knife found him 2 more times. Despite his injuries, Harold fought with the desperation of a man who had everything to lose and nothing left to prove, except that right still mattered in the world. When both attackers finally fled, leaving their original victim and Harold bleeding in the alley, Harold crawled over to the young soldier. "Stay with me, son," Harold whispered, pressing his hands against the worst of the young man's wounds. "Help is coming." With his free hand, he managed to pull out his cell phone and dial 911, though his vision was starting to blur from blood loss and shock. The last thing Harold remembered before losing consciousness was the young man gripping his wrist with surprising strength and whispering something that sounded like a serial number, followed by the words, "Tell them, Bravo 6 needs extraction." The sound of sirens pulled Harold back to consciousness. Bright light stabbed through his eyelids as paramedics worked frantically around him. His body felt like it was on fire, particularly his left shoulder and side where the knife had found its mark. Through the haze of pain and medical activity, he could hear urgent voices discussing blood pressure, potential organ damage, and the need for immediate surgery. "Sir, can you hear me?" A young paramedic with kind eyes was checking his pulse. "You're going to be okay. We're taking you to Phoenix General Hospital. You lost a lot of blood, but you're stable now." Harold tried to speak, but his throat felt like sandpaper. He managed to croak out a single word. "Soldier." "The other victim is already on his way to the hospital," the paramedic assured him. "He's in critical condition, but alive. You saved his life, sir. That was incredibly brave." As they loaded Harold into the ambulance, he caught sight of the alley where everything had happened. Police officers were everywhere, taking photos, measuring distances, and interviewing the few witnesses who had emerged from nearby buildings. Yellow tape cordoned off the entire area, and Harold noticed something odd. Among the regular city police, he spotted two men in dark suits who definitely weren't local law enforcement. They stood apart from the others, speaking quietly into phones and watching the ambulance with intense interest. The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of pain medication and concerned medical chatter. Harold drifted in and out of consciousness, but each time he woke, the same questions nagged at him. Who was that young soldier? What had those men been looking for? And why did the phrase "Bravo 6 needs extraction" sound so familiar? At Phoenix General Hospital, Harold was rushed into emergency surgery. The knife had punctured his lung and caused significant internal bleeding, but the doctors worked with the efficiency of a well-trained team. While Harold was under anesthesia, Detective Maria Santos arrived to begin her investigation. Detective Santos had seen her share of violent crimes in 15 years on the force, but something about this case felt different. The initial report described it as a robbery gone wrong, but the evidence didn't quite fit. The victim, who had been identified as Corporal James Chen, hadn't been robbed. His wallet, containing over $300 in cash, was still in his pocket. His watch, an expensive military-issue timepiece, remained on his wrist. What troubled Detective Santos even more was the response her case was generating. Within 2 hours of the incident, she had received calls from the FBI, the Department of Defense, and someone claiming to represent interested parties in Washington. Nobody would tell her exactly why a simple assault case was drawing so much attention from federal agencies. Corporal Chen was in the intensive care unit, sedated and connected to multiple machines. The doctors said he would survive, but it would be days before they could question him. His military records showed he was stationed at Luke Air Force Base, but when Detective Santos called the base, she was told that Chen was on leave and they couldn't provide any additional information without proper clearance. Harold woke up in the recovery room 6 hours after surgery. His chest was wrapped in bandages and several tubes monitored his vital signs. Despite the pain medication, his mind felt clearer than it had since the attack. A nurse checked his chart and smiled when she saw he was awake. "How are you feeling, Mr. Martinez?" she asked, adjusting his IV drip. "The surgery went very well. Dr. Patterson says you should make a full recovery, though it'll take some time." The young man from the alley, Harold asked. "How is he?" "Corporal Chen is stable," the nurse replied. "He's been asking for you, actually. Keeps saying he needs to thank the man who saved his life." Before Harold could respond, Detective Santos entered the room. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had learned not to accept easy answers. She introduced herself and pulled up a chair next to Harold's bed. "Mr. Martinez, I need to ask you some questions about what happened this morning," she began. But first, I want to thank you. What you did was incredibly brave and probably saved Corporal Chen's life. Harold nodded slowly. I couldn't just walk away. Can you tell me exactly what you saw? Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out. Harold recounted the entire incident from hearing the voices in the alley to the final moments before he lost consciousness. Detective Santos took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification about the attacker's appearance or their exact words. You mentioned that Corporal Chen said something before you passed out, she said. Something about Bravo 6? Harold hesitated. Something in the detective's tone suggested this detail was more important than a dying man's random words. He said, tell them Bravo 6 needs extraction. It sounded like military terminology. Detective Santos wrote this down carefully. Mr. Martinez, did you serve in the military? 30 years in the Army, Harold replied. Retired in 1998 as a sergeant major. And during your service, did you ever hear the phrase Bravo 6 used? Harold thought carefully. Military call signs and unit designations had been part of his life for 3 decades. But something about this particular combination stirred a memory he couldn't quite grasp. It sounds familiar, but I can't place it. Why? Is it significant? Detective Santos closed her notebook and stood up. Mr. Martinez, I'm going to be honest with you. This case has attracted attention from some very important people. People who don't usually get involved in local assault cases. I think you and Corporal Chen stumbled into something much bigger than a simple robbery. What kind of bigger? That's what I'm trying to figure out. But I want you to know that we're taking this very seriously. There will be officers posted outside your room tonight just as a precaution. After Detective Santos left, Harold lay in his hospital bed staring at the ceiling. The pain medication made him drowsy, but his mind refused to rest. Somewhere in his memory, the phrase Bravo 6 connected to something important, something from his military past that he couldn't quite remember. Around midnight, a nurse he hadn't seen before entered his room. She was older than the day staff, with gray hair and gentle hands as she checked his bandages. As she worked, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Martinez, someone very important wants to thank you for what you did today, she said, not looking directly at him. They asked me to tell you that Bravo 6 was a designation used for a special operations team that went missing in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Everyone on that team was declared killed in action. Harold's blood ran cold. Then how is Corporal Chen? That's the question everyone is asking, the nurse replied. And it's why some very serious people are going to want to talk to you very soon. She finished checking his bandages and moved toward the door. Get some rest, Mr. Martinez. Tomorrow is going to be a very interesting day. As the mysterious nurse disappeared into the hallway, Harold realized that saving one young soldier's life had just pulled him into something far more complex and dangerous than a random street crime. Somewhere in the darkness outside his window, he was certain that people were already making plans that would change his quiet retirement forever. Harold was discharged from the hospital the next morning against his doctor's strong recommendations. The knife wounds were healing well, but he was still weak from blood loss and the trauma of surgery. Detective Santos had arranged for a patrol car to take him home, though she warned him that federal agents would likely want to interview him soon. The ride through his neighborhood felt different now. Harold noticed things he'd overlooked before. A van parked across from his house that hadn't been there when he left for his walk yesterday. 2 men in jogging clothes who seemed to be running the same block repeatedly, and a utility truck working on power lines that didn't appear to need any work. Looks like you've got some attention, Officer Rodriguez commented as they pulled into Harold's driveway. Want me to stick around for a while? Harold shook his head. I'll be fine. These old bones have been through worse. But as soon as the patrol car drove away, Harold felt exposed and vulnerable. His house, which had always been his sanctuary, now felt like a fishbowl. He made his way slowly to his front door, every step sending sharp pains through his side. The key felt heavy in his hand as he unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell hit him immediately. Someone had been in his house. Harold's military training kicked in despite his injuries. The scent wasn't cologne or cleaning products. It was the subtle mixture of gun oil, tactical gear, and the particular soap that special operations teams used. He knew it because he had once been part of that world, though it felt like a lifetime ago. Moving carefully through his living room, Harold noticed small signs that confirmed his suspicions. A book moved slightly on his coffee table. The cushions on his couch compressed in a way that suggested someone had been sitting there recently. His mail had been disturbed, not obviously, but enough for someone with his experience to notice. Harold was reaching for his phone to call Detective Santos when he heard the vehicles approaching. Not one car, but several, moving with the coordinated precision of a military convoy. He looked out his front window and felt his breath catch in his throat. 4 black SUVs had surrounded his house. Men in dark tactical gear were already positioned at strategic points around his property, behind his neighbor's fence, near the large oak tree in his front yard, and at both ends of his street. These weren't FBI agents or local police. These were operators, the kind of soldiers Harold had once worked alongside in classified missions that officially never happened. The front door opened without anyone knocking. 6 men entered Harold's house with the fluid efficiency of a team that had worked together for years. They wore no identifying patches or rank insignia, but Harold could tell by their bearing and equipment that these were Navy SEALs. The team leader was a man in his late 30s, with gray eyes and the kind of weathered face that spoke of multiple deployments in harsh environments. He approached Harold with his hands visible but ready, the way professionals greet someone they respect but don't entirely trust. "Mr. Martinez," the man said in a voice that commanded attention without being loud. "My name is Commander Wright. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but we need to talk, and time is extremely limited." "About Corporal Chen?" Harold asked, remaining standing despite the pain in his side. "About Staff Sergeant Chen," Commander Wright corrected, "and about Operation Silent Thunder, which you inadvertently became part of yesterday morning." Harold felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "Chen isn't his real name," Staff Sergeant David Park, Wright confirmed. "Former member of an Army Special Forces unit that was conducting deep cover operations in Afghanistan. His team was designated Bravo 6. The nurse at the hospital said Bravo 6 was declared killed in action." Commander Wright gestured toward Harold's couch. "Please, sit down. This is going to take some explanation, and you're still recovering from surgery." Harold remained standing. "I'm fine. Keep talking." 3 years ago, Bravo 6 was tasked with infiltrating a terrorist network that was planning attacks on American soil. It was a long-term operation requiring the team to go completely dark. No contact with command, no official records, nothing that could compromise their mission. "So you faked their deaths," Harold said. It wasn't a question. The official story was that their convoy hit an IED outside Kandahar. Complete loss of personnel and equipment. Meanwhile, the real Bravo 6 was establishing deep cover identities within the terrorist organization. And something went wrong. Wright's expression darkened. 2 months ago, we lost contact with the entire team. All 6 operators vanished without a trace. We had no idea if they were captured, killed, or had gone rogue until Staff Sergeant Park showed up in Phoenix, using the identity David Chen. Harold absorbed this information, understanding now why federal agencies were so interested in yesterday's attack. The men who stabbed him, they weren't random criminals. We believe they were part of the same terrorist cell that Bravo 6 was investigating. Somehow they discovered Park's real identity and tracked him to Phoenix. We don't know how much they learned from him before you intervened. What were they looking for? They kept asking him where it was. Commander Wright exchanged glances with one of his team members. Staff Sergeant Park was carrying intelligence about a planned terrorist attack on American soil. Details about targets, timing, and methodology. If that information falls into the wrong hands, the implications hit Harold like a physical blow. How many people could die? Potentially thousands. The attack is scheduled for next week during a major public event. Without Park's intelligence, we can't stop it. Harold sank onto his couch, finally accepting that his legs weren't steady enough to keep him upright. "What do you need from me?" When Park regains consciousness, he's going to be disoriented and paranoid. 3 years of deep cover operation followed by a near-death experience will have him questioning everyone's motives. But you saved his life. He trusts you. You want me to talk to him? We need him to tell us everything he learned about the planned attack. Location, timing, the identities of the other terrorists involved. But he's not going to cooperate with official interrogation. He's been trained to resist that. Harold understood the psychology. After 3 years of pretending to be someone else, surrounded by people who would kill him if they discovered his true identity, Park wouldn't trust anyone in authority. But an old veteran who had risked his life to save him, that was different. "There's something else," Wright continued. The terrorist cell knows that Park survived the attack yesterday. They also know that a civilian intervened and that both Park and his rescuer were taken to the hospital. They've identified you, Mr. Martinez. Meaning your life is now in danger. These people have already proven they're willing to kill to protect their operation. They'll assume Park shared information with you, whether he did or not. Harold looked around his modest living room, at the photographs of his late wife, Martha, and the military commendations he'd earned over 3 decades of service. Yesterday morning, his biggest concern had been whether the corner market would have his favorite brand of coffee in stock. Now he was apparently in the crosshairs of international terrorists. So what's the plan? He asked. Commander Wright leaned forward. We escort you back to the hospital under heavy security. You talk to Staff Sergeant Park and convince him to share what he knows about the planned attack. Then we relocate you to a safe house until this threat is neutralized. And if I refuse, then thousands of innocent Americans will likely die next week, and you'll probably be killed by terrorist agents within the next 48 hours, Wright said bluntly. Mr. Martinez, I know this isn't what you signed up for when you went for a walk yesterday morning, but sometimes civilian life and military duty intersect in unexpected ways. Harold thought about the young soldier lying in the hospital, remembering the desperate strength in his grip when he whispered that mysterious phrase. He thought about Martha, who had always told him that a person's character was defined by what they did when no one was watching and nothing was required of them. When do we leave? Harold asked. Commander Wright smiled grimly. Right now, and Mr. Martinez, thank you. What you did yesterday and what you're doing now, it matters more than you know. The convoy moved through Phoenix with military precision, taking a route that avoided main streets and traffic cameras. Harold sat in the middle vehicle between Commander Wright and another SEAL operator, watching the city pass by through bulletproof windows. The pain medication was wearing off, and every bump in the road sent sharp reminders of his knife wounds through his body. Mr. Martinez, Commander Wright said, consulting a tablet computer. I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer. Your military records show 30 years of service, but there are some significant gaps in your file, periods where your assignments are classified so far above my clearance level that even I can't access them. Harold had been expecting this conversation ever since the SEALs appeared at his house. That was a long time ago. Not that long ago. According to what I can see, you were involved in some very sensitive operations between 1985 and 1995, operations that officially never happened. Lots of things officially never happened during the Cold War. Commander Wright turned to face Harold directly. Mr. Martinez, 3 men with knives attacked you yesterday morning. You were 72 years old, recovering from a heart attack you had 6 months ago, and you hadn't been in active military service for over 20 years. Yet somehow you not only survived but managed to drive off 2 armed attackers while suffering multiple stab wounds yourself. Harold stared out the window at the familiar streets of his neighborhood disappearing behind them. I got lucky. Bullshit. The word came from the SEAL operator on Harold's other side, a younger man with the build of someone who spent most of his free time in the gym. Sir, I've read the police report. You disarmed one attacker and broke the other one's wrist before they managed to stab you. That's not luck. That's training that most people never receive. Commander Wright consulted his tablet again. Harold Martinez, enlisted in the Army in 1968 at age 18. Served 2 tours in Vietnam, where he earned a Bronze Star and 2 Purple Hearts. Promoted rapidly through the enlisted ranks, which is unusual for someone without college education. Then in 1985, his records become almost entirely classified. Commander, Harold said quietly, some secrets are supposed to stay buried. Under normal circumstances, I'd agree. But these aren't normal circumstances. In 6 hours, you're going to walk into a hospital room and try to convince a traumatized special operations soldier to trust you with intelligence that could prevent a terrorist attack. Staff Sergeant Park has been trained to detect deception and manipulation. If you're not who you appear to be, he'll know it instantly. Harold closed his eyes and let his mind drift back to a time he'd spent 20 years trying to forget. Martha had known some of it, though he'd never told her the worst parts. She'd understood that there were missions he couldn't discuss and places he'd been that didn't appear on any official map. Delta Force, Harold said finally. I was recruited in 1985 when the unit was still officially non-existent, spent 10 years conducting operations in places and situations that required complete deniability. The atmosphere in the vehicle changed immediately. Even among elite military units, Delta Force held a special reputation. They were the soldiers who handled missions too sensitive for anyone else, operating in the shadows where conventional military rules didn't apply. "What was your role?" Commander Wright asked. "Senior NCO for a team that specialized in deep infiltration and personnel recovery. We went into places where American soldiers weren't supposed to be and brought out people who weren't supposed to exist. Like the kind of operations Bravo 6 was conducting." Harold nodded. "Similar concept, different era. We pulled assets out of East Germany, extracted compromised CIA operatives from hostile countries, and occasionally eliminated problems that diplomatic channels couldn't handle." "That explains the combat skills," the younger SEAL said with new respect in his voice. "Delta Force hand-to-hand training is legendary." "It also explains why Staff Sergeant Park might trust you," Commander Wright added. "He'll recognize you as someone who understands his world." The convoy pulled into the hospital's parking garage, where additional security teams were already positioned. Harold could see snipers on nearby rooftops and agents posted at every entrance and exit. The entire operation had the feel of a presidential security detail. "Before we go upstairs," Commander Wright said, "there's something else you need to know about Staff Sergeant Park's mission." Bravo 6 wasn't just gathering intelligence about a terrorist attack. They were trying to prevent the theft of weapons-grade plutonium from a research facility in Pakistan. Harold felt his blood go cold. How much plutonium? Enough to build a dirty bomb that could contaminate several city blocks for decades. The terrorists Bravo 6 infiltrated have been planning to smuggle the material into the United States and detonate it during next week's Independence Day celebration in New York City. Central Park? The Great Lawn during the annual concert. Expected attendance is over 100,000 people, plus millions more watching on television. If they succeed, it won't just be the immediate casualties. The psychological impact of a radiological attack on American soil would change our country forever. Harold understood now why so many federal agencies were involved and why. The Navy SEALs had surrounded his house at dawn. This wasn't just about preventing another terrorist attack. It was about preventing a national catastrophe that could kill thousands and terrorize millions. "What happened to the rest of Bravo 6? Harold asked. "We don't know. Park is the only member of the team who has surfaced since they went dark. The others could be dead, captured, or still maintaining their cover. Until we can debrief Park, we're operating blind." They exited the vehicles and moved through the hospital with the coordinated efficiency of a special operations unit. Doctors and nurses stepped aside as the heavily armed team escorted Harold through corridors that had been cleared of civilian traffic. The elevator ride to the intensive care unit was silent except for the constant chatter of radio communications from the security teams. Positioned throughout the building, Staff Sergeant Park's room was at the end of a hallway that had been converted into a military checkpoint. 2 hospital security guards had been replaced by Navy SEALs in civilian clothes, and electronic jamming equipment prevented any unauthorized communications from entering or leaving the area. Before they entered the room, Commander Wright placed a hand on Harold's shoulder. "Mr. Martinez, I want you to understand something. What you're about to do requires a kind of courage that has nothing to do with physical bravery. You're going to have to earn the trust of a man who has spent 3 years trusting no one. His psychological state is fragile, and his mission training tells him that everyone is potentially an enemy. What if he won't talk to me either? Then we try other methods. But those methods take time we don't have, and they might not work on someone with his training. You're our best option for getting the information we need quickly and reliably." Harold looked through the small window in the door at the young man lying connected to multiple machines. Staff Sergeant Park looked small and vulnerable in the hospital bed, nothing like the dangerous special operations soldier Commander Wright had described. But Harold knew that appearances could be deceiving, especially when it came to elite military personnel. "There's one more thing," Commander Wright said. "The terrorist cell knows Park is here. We've intercepted communications suggesting they're planning an attempt to either extract him or eliminate him within the next 12 hours. That means you'll be in significant danger the entire time you're in that room." Harold thought about Martha again, about the quiet life they'd built together after his retirement from Delta Force. She'd made him promise to leave the dangerous parts of his past behind and focus on their future together. But Martha was gone now. and sometimes the past had a way of demanding payment for old debts. "Commander," Harold said, "I didn't save that boy's life yesterday just to let him die today, and I sure as hell didn't survive 30 years in the Army just to let terrorists set off a dirty bomb in New York City." He pushed open the door to Staff Sergeant Park's room, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether thousands of innocent Americans lived or died, and whether his own quiet retirement was over forever. Staff Sergeant David Park's eyes opened the moment Harold entered the room, despite the heavy sedation he was under. Harold could see the instant calculation happening behind those dark eyes, assessing threats, determining escape routes, categorizing Harold as either friend or enemy. It was a look Harold recognized from his own mirror during his Delta Force years. "You're the old man from the alley," Park said, his voice hoarse but alert. "They told me you saved my life." Harold approached the bed slowly, keeping his hands visible and his movements non-threatening. "Harold Martinez. And you're not Corporal Chen." Park's expression didn't change, but Harold caught the slight tensing of muscles that suggested the young soldier was preparing to fight despite his injuries. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Staff Sergeant David Park, formerly of Bravo 6, Harold said quietly. "Deep cover operation officially KIA 3 years ago. Currently in possession of intelligence about a planned radiological attack on New York City." Park closed his eyes and let out a long breath. When he opened them again, the pretense was gone. "How much do you know?" "Enough to understand that time is running out." Harold pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, wincing as the movement aggravated his knife wounds. "I also know that you've been trained not to trust anyone, especially people in authority. But I'm not here as part of any official operation." "Then why are you here?" Harold considered his words carefully. In Delta Force, he'd learned that trust was something that couldn't be demanded or manufactured. It had to be earned through shared understanding and demonstrated competence. "Because 30 years ago I was where you are now. Different mission, different enemy, but the same impossible situation where too many lives depended on making the right choice." "You were military?" "Delta Force, 1985 to 1995. I've been in rooms like this before on both sides of the conversation." For the first time, Park's defensive posture relaxed slightly. Harold could see him processing this information, running it through the mental filters that 3 years of deep cover had trained him to use. "The men who attacked you in the alley," Harold continued, "they weren't random criminals. They were part of the cell you've been infiltrating. They knew who you really were." Park nodded slowly. "Jamal Hassan, the cell leader. He's been suspicious of me for months. I think someone from the outside tipped him off, which means your cover is blown and the entire operation is compromised." "Not entirely." Park struggled to sit up straighter, and Harold could see the determination that had kept him alive for 3 years of undercover work. "I managed to get the information out before they grabbed me. The location where they're storing the plutonium, the transportation plan, the target details. It's all documented." "Where?" Park reached under his hospital gown and pulled out a small waterproof pouch that had somehow escaped the attention of the medical staff. "Micro SD card. Everything Bravo 6 learned about Operation Desert Sunrise is on there." Harold took the card, noting how Park's hand trembled slightly as he handed it over. The young soldier was running on pure determination now, his body pushed far beyond its normal limits by training and necessity. "Desert Sunrise? Their code name for the attack. July 4th, Central Park during the concert. But it's not just about the dirty bomb." Park's voice became more urgent. "They have people inside the security apparatus. Someone with high-level clearance has been feeding them information about federal response protocols." Before Harold could respond, the lights in the room flickered and went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Through the door, Harold could hear the distant sound of automatic weapons fire echoing through the hospital corridors. "They're here," Park whispered. "Hassan doesn't leave loose ends." Harold pocketed the SD card and moved to the window. 4 floors below, he could see muzzle flashes in the parking garage and black-clad figures moving with tactical precision toward the hospital entrances. The security perimeter that Commander Wright had established was under assault by what appeared to be a well-organized and heavily armed team. "Can you move?" Harold asked. Park was already pulling IV lines out of his arms and struggling to get out of bed. "I've been hurt worse and stayed operational longer." Harold helped him to his feet, noting the professional way Park immediately began checking for weapons and planning their next move. Despite his injuries, the young soldier's training was taking over. The door burst open, but instead of terrorists, Commander Wright and two of his team members entered with weapons ready. "We need to move now," Wright said. "The building is compromised and we've lost contact with 3 of our perimeter teams." "How many attackers?" Harold asked, automatically falling back into the tactical mindset that had kept him alive in dozens of similar situations. "At least 12, possibly more. They hit us simultaneously from 3 directions, which means they had inside intelligence about our security layout." Park grabbed Harold's arm. "That confirms it. Someone in your chain of command is feeding them information. Which means we can't trust normal extraction protocols," Wright realized. "They'll know exactly where we're planning to go." The sound of gunfire was getting closer, and Harold could hear heavy footsteps in the corridor outside. Through the window, he saw smoke rising from several points around the hospital complex as the battle intensified. "There's a service elevator at the north end of this floor," Park said. "It goes directly to the basement level where there's a maintenance tunnel that connects to the subway system." "How do you know that?" Wright asked. "I studied the building plans when I was planning my own escape routes. Old habits from 3 years of staying alive in hostile territory." Wright spoke rapidly into his radio, coordinating with the teams still holding defensive positions throughout the hospital. Harold could hear the strain in the responses. They were outnumbered and fighting an enemy that seemed to know their every move. "Sir," one of Wright's operators reported, "they're using our own radio frequencies. They're listening to everything we say." Wright cursed and switched his radio off. "From now on, we communicate face-to-face only." The lights in the corridor outside flickered and died, plunging the entire floor into emergency lighting. Harold heard the distinctive sound of flashbang grenades detonating somewhere nearby, followed by more automatic weapons fire. "They're clearing floor by floor," Park observed. "Professional tactics, military-grade equipment. This isn't some improvised rescue attempt." Harold looked at the young soldier with new respect. Even wounded and heavily medicated, Park was analyzing the tactical situation with the cool professionalism of someone who had survived impossible odds before. "The tunnel you mentioned," Harold said. "How far does it go?" "About half a mile to the downtown subway hub. From there, we can access the entire city transit system." Wright nodded. "It's our best option. But we need to move fast. They'll figure out our route eventually." As they prepared to leave the room, Harold caught Park's attention. "Staff Sergeant, that information you gave me, is it enough to stop the attack?" Park met his eyes with the steady gaze of a soldier who had spent 3 years staring death in the face. "If it gets to the right people and if they act on it immediately, yes. But Harold—" Park paused, using his first name for the first time. "Hassan has backup plans. Even if we stop Desert Sunrise, he'll find another way to strike. The only way to end this is to take down the entire network." The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor told them their time was up. Harold pocketed the SD card more securely and checked that he could still move despite his injuries. Around him, 3 of America's most elite warriors prepared for what might be their final battle. "Gentlemen," Harold said, feeling decades fall away as his old training took over, "let's go save New York City." The escape through the hospital's maintenance tunnels felt like a journey through the bowels of the earth. Harold's wounds screamed with every step, but adrenaline and 30 years of military training kept him moving. Behind them, the sound of the battle above ground continued. Muffled explosions, automatic weapons fire, and the occasional crash of breaking glass. Commander Wright led the way with night vision equipment, while one of his operators brought up the rear. Park moved with surprising steadiness for someone who had been near death 12 hours earlier, his special forces training overriding his body's protests. Harold found himself impressed by the young soldier's resilience and determination. "How much further?" Wright whispered as they navigated through a maze of pipes and electrical conduits. "Another 200 meters, Park replied. "The tunnel opens into the main subway maintenance area. From there, we can access the Red Line platform." As they moved through the underground passage, Harold couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded. The attack on the hospital had been too well coordinated, too perfectly timed. Someone with detailed knowledge of SEAL tactics had planned every aspect of the assault. "Commander," Harold said quietly, "we need to consider the possibility that this is exactly what they want us to do." "Meaning?" The attack was designed to force us into this specific escape route. If there's a mole in your organization, they know about these tunnels too. Wright stopped moving and held up his hand for silence. In the distance, Harold could hear something that confirmed his worst fears. Footsteps in the tunnel ahead of them, moving with the careful precision of trained operators. Ambush, Park whispered. They're waiting for us at the subway access point. Wright spoke so quietly that Harold could barely hear him. We need another way out. Park closed his eyes, visualizing the building schematics he had memorized during his weeks of recovery planning. There's a utility access about 50 meters back that connects to the storm drain system. It runs parallel to the main tunnel but exits 6 blocks away. That means backtracking toward the hospital, one of Wright's operators pointed out, which is exactly why they won't expect it, Harold said. Sometimes the best way forward is back. As they retraced their steps, Harold's mind was already working on the larger problem. Even if they escaped the immediate trap, the intelligence on the SD card was useless if they couldn't get it to people they could trust. The mole in the security apparatus could compromise any official channels they tried to use. Park, Harold whispered. During your 3 years undercover, did you develop any independent contacts? People outside the official chain of command? 1. A CIA analyst named Sarah Chen, no relation despite the name. She was my handler before the operation went dark. If anyone can be trusted with this intelligence, it's her. Can you contact her directly? Not through normal channels. But she gave me an emergency protocol before the mission started. A way to reach her if everything else failed. They found the utility access Park had remembered. A narrow opening that led to a concrete drainage tunnel barely wide enough for one person at a time. The smell of decades of accumulated water and debris was overwhelming, but it represented their best chance of avoiding the ambush waiting ahead. One by one, they crawled through the tunnel, their movements echoing in the confined space despite their attempts at stealth. Harold's knife wounds reopened during the crawl, soaking his shirt with blood, but he forced himself to keep moving. Too many lives depended on getting that SD card to safety. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, they emerged from a storm drain outlet in an industrial area 6 blocks from the hospital. Dawn was breaking over Phoenix, painting the sky in soft colors that seemed almost surreal after the violence of the night. Wright immediately began making calls on a secure satellite phone, but Harold could tell from his expression that the news wasn't good. 2 of my men are confirmed KIA, Wright reported. 3 more wounded, and the terrorists escaped when police backup arrived. Whoever planned this operation knew exactly how we would respond. Which confirms there's a high-level mole, Park said. Commander, with respect, we can't trust any of your normal communication channels. Harold pulled out the SD card. Park, you said you could contact your CIA handler independently. Do it. Now. Park found a working payphone at a nearby gas station and made a call using a number sequence that Harold recognized as a deep cover emergency protocol. The conversation was brief and conducted in a code that would mean nothing to anyone listening, but Harold could see the relief in Park's eyes when he hung up. She's clean, Park said. Sarah confirms that they've suspected a high-level penetration for months, but couldn't identify the source. She's arranging a secure meeting. Where? There's a safe house in Tempe. She'll have a technical team standing by to analyze the intelligence immediately. The meeting took place 3 hours later in a nondescript office building that looked like it housed insurance companies and accounting firms. Sarah Chen turned out to be a woman in her 40s with the sharp eyes and careful manner of someone who had spent years analyzing threats to national security. Staff Sergeant Park, she said, embracing him briefly. We thought you were dead. Close enough, Park replied. Sarah, this is Harold Martinez, the man who saved my life, and Commander Wright, Navy SEALs. Sarah shook Harold's hand with genuine gratitude. Mr. Martinez, I understand you've put yourself at considerable personal risk to help us. Ma'am, I just did what any American should do. Sarah's technical team worked with impressive efficiency, loading the contents of the SD card onto secure computers and beginning their analysis immediately. Harold watched as maps, photographs, documents, and video files filled multiple screens. This is incredible, Sarah said, studying the intelligence. 3 years of deep infiltration work, detailed plans for Operation Desert Sunrise, financial records, communication intercepts, and... She paused, staring at one particular file. Proof of the mole's identity. Who is it? Wright asked. Deputy Director Robert Carlson, NSC Counterterrorism Division. He's been feeding information to Hassan's cell for at least 18 months. Harold felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. That's how they knew about the hospital security arrangements. That's how they knew our escape routes. And that's how they've been staying one step ahead of every operation we've mounted against them, Sarah added, but not anymore. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of coordinated federal operations. Using Park's intelligence, FBI and military teams simultaneously raided the terrorist cell's safe houses, weapons storage facilities, and the location where the plutonium was being held. Carlson was arrested at his home in Virginia, along with 3 other conspirators who had been passing information to the terrorists. The planned attack on Central Park was prevented, though the public never learned how close they had come to experiencing America's first radiological terrorism attack. The official story was that federal agencies had disrupted a conventional bombing plot through routine intelligence work. Harold found himself at the center of a classified debriefing process that lasted 3 days. Officials from agencies he didn't even know existed asked him detailed questions about every aspect of his involvement, from the original alley attack to his escape through the hospital tunnels. On the 4th day, Harold was finally allowed to return home. His house looked exactly the same, but he felt like a different person. The quiet retirement he had planned seemed both more precious and more fragile than it had before. Commander Wright came to see him one final time before his team returned to their base. "Mr. Martinez," Wright said, "I want you to know that what you did prevented a national catastrophe. The intelligence Park provided led to the arrest of 12 terrorist operatives and prevented an attack that could have killed thousands of people. What happens to Park? He's being debriefed and then reassigned. Probably a training position where he can pass on what he learned during 3 years of deep cover work. He specifically asked me to thank you again." "And the other members of Bravo 6? Wright's expression grew somber. "Still missing. We're hoping Park's intelligence will help us locate them." But he didn't need to finish the sentence. After Wright left, Harold sat on his front porch in the evening quiet, watching his neighbors go about their normal lives. Mrs. Rodriguez was watering her garden. Young Tommy was riding his bicycle in circles in front of his house. The world looked exactly the same as it had a week ago, but Harold knew that hundreds of thousands of people were alive and safe because of choices made by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Martinez?" The voice was young, familiar, and carried a note of deep gratitude. "This is David Park. I wanted to call and thank you one more time. How are you feeling, son?" "Better every day. I also wanted you to know that Sarah's team found evidence that might lead to the other members of my team. There's hope that some of them might still be alive." Harold smiled. "That's good news. Mr. Martinez, I know this week turned your life upside down, but I want you to understand something. What you did in that alley and everything that came after it mattered. It mattered more than you'll ever know."